Charles, what part of Detroit are you from exactly?
So I lived, I lived what is now people in Detroit would know it as like the Cass Corridor. When I first was in Detroit, I lived in the Cass Corridor, which used to be, if you were from Detroit, it's pretty rough. It was a pretty rough part of Detroit. It's not as since I've moved, it's
Yeah.
gotten taken over by hipsters and urban gardens and restaurants and gentrified to the max. It does not look anything like when I was there. It doesn't, certainly not anything that would ever feel like home when I go there. And then after a while I moved out to the burbs, so kind of saw both ends of it in Detroit.
Actually, I messed up. I should have started this podcast with a "What up, though." I should have started. I should have started with that. So you were born there, grew up there, went to Michigan State, and after Michigan State is when you left. Like kind of, and I should know this. We've known each other for like 20 years. I should know your entire life story by now. But kind of take me through your relationship with Detroit.
Yeah, no. I was born on the west side of the state. Yeah. So I migrated to Detroit after. So I was born in Grand Rapids area, went to Michigan State, and then moved to Detroit after Michigan State.
Okay.
Well, I took an internship in Flint, and then the first time I lived in Detroit, I took an internship in Detroit. Then I moved to Detroit after college. So yeah, flip flops. I migrated to Detroit.
So you're more a Michigander, right? Is that how you say it? You're more a Michigander than you are of Detroit. Is that fair?
I'm a man of the world now. I don't even claim Michigan anymore. I had to scratch Michigan off my list after a while. We don't want to go down that whole hole, but yeah.
Okay. I got you. We're sticking to sports here, Charles. I think I know what you're talking about. We're sticking to sports.
Yeah. Let's just stick to sports.
Okay. Okay, no problem. But the reason I'm trying to kind of like paint this picture, because I feel like you grew up rooting for the Lions, though, right? Is that am I understanding correct? Yeah. So so tell me what the Lions meant to you and meant to your family growing up.
It was I think I understand what Browns fans feel like. I can, like, if I were going to put it through like a prism, it's sort of like you expected the worst. I grew up in the Barry Sanders years too. That's when I found like NFL football. So like when I think about my childhood, Rodney Peete, Barry Sanders, like Lomas Brown, these are Benny Blades, Chris Spielman. These were the Lions that I grew up.
Brett Perryman.
Later, but those were the Lions that I grew up. But when you would hear stories in your family, right? That's how it always gets handed down. It was just the constant complaint of they've never had a quarterback. They're terrible. The owners are bad. They're going to let you down. And that's the lineage you kind of grew up with. And to me, my apex of fandom as a Lions fan was it was that, 92 when they beat the Dallas Cowboys and they advanced to the NFC title game, only to get throttled by Mark Rippon and the
Washington franchise.
Washington franchise. So it was, but it was, you knew growing up there. And by the way, I grew up in that era. For me was 80s Pistons basketball, right? They were the it was the champs, and then, rolled into the Red Wings. So there was a lot of sports success in Michigan. University of Michigan had won a national title under Steve Fisher with Glenn Rice. Like there was,
and that was before the Fab Five.
That was before the Fab Five, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of sports success in Michigan. The Lions were never part of it, but you always knew that people loved football and loved the Lions as much as they hated them. They loved them, and if there was ever success, it would so overwhelm any other kind of sports success in Michigan and Detroit that it wouldn't even be close. I mean, it would dwarf anything. And that's kind of what you're seeing right now with Detroit. Their fans are traveling. Like you watch them in Tampa and you're like, yo, there's Lions fans in Tampa right now who are going to see this team. And Green Bay, they take over a quarter of Lambeau, during that. I mean,
that's when I saw it. I was there for that Thursday night game, and I remember talking to one of the PR guys with the Lions, and Dan Campbell was asked about it in the post-game press conference on that Thursday night game, and I observed to one of the PR guys. I was like, it's crazy. Like, this is how you become a national team. I said, how many Lions fans would you say are from Michigan or were born into their Lions fandom? And he was like, probably all of them. I was like, because think about it. In that game, Lil Wayne, who like me is from New Orleans, Lil Wayne led the Packers out of the tunnel. Lil Wayne is a Packers fan. Probably heard the story, many of you, but I'll repeat it in case you don't know. Lil Wayne is a Packers fan because the Packers beat the Patriots in Super Bowl 31 in New Orleans. And Lil Wayne's father brought home a bunch of Packers stuff from the Super Bowl, paraphernalia and whatnot, memorabilia, and that's how Lil Wayne became a Packers fan. He's a diehard Packers fan. And so I told the guy from the Packers, from the Lions, I beg your pardon, that this is how you become a national team, winning on national television in prime time, being good. And now you have a generation of football fans who will grow up seeing the Lions be good, and years from now will say, oh, I grew up a Lions fan because I'm from California, but I like Jared Goff, or, I liked Amon-Ra St. Brown, and so on and so forth. So that's one. Even as a New Orleanian, though, my relationship with the Lions, couple of ways. Like you and I are the same age, grew up loving Barry Sanders. Who didn't love Barry Sanders nationwide? So love Barry Sanders, love the run and shoot offense. It was Wayne Fontes in Detroit, and it was in Houston as well. Both those teams ran that run and shoot offense. So love the Lions growing up from afar. They weren't my primary team, but I rooted for them kind of like casually. Tecmo Super Bowl. Who didn't love playing with Barry Sanders and the Lions on Tecmo Super Bowl? And last but not least, Beverly Hills Cop. Shout out to Mumford High School, but Beverly Hills Cop, like Eddie Murphy put the Lions, and put Detroit on the map in many respects. So all of that, Charles, you're a storyteller, was a prelude, because I don't think there's anybody more qualified, at least in my circle, to talk about it. You just alluded to it, what this Lions renaissance means to Michigan, to Detroit, and to Lions fans, to have arguably the best team in the NFC. They're in the conversation. I think prior to Sunday, you would have said it's definitely San Francisco. They lose to Cleveland. We'll get to the Browns in a second. Philadelphia, defending conference champs, they lose to the Jets. We'll get to the Jets in a second. Here's Detroit, 4-0 on the road, 3-0 on the road, 3-0 on the road. They're looking to go 4-0 on the road, 3-0 on the road. And like you said, traveling. Got fans packing stadiums, representing wherever they go. Tell me more about what this means to people like your family, that little fan that lives somewhere deep inside of Charles Robinson, that kid that's buried, your inner child, what this means.
And I can tell you, my love for them turned into hatred, because my first beat I covered was the Lions on the NFL. And they won 5 games over 2 years. It was the Morningweg Millen era. And I learned to hate that franchise from the inside, because there were, just certain things about the franchise, the way business was run, ownership, all these things. And so it was like stamped out of me, covering, not just because I was a journalist, but also because I got a chance to see how the sausage was made and why it was terrible, and so I departed. Once I left that beat, I really never came back to it until, in terms of really happy to see the success, happy for my friends and family, but it was a very specific moment. So Dan Campbell, I knew Dan Campbell from a little bit from New Orleans, a little bit from Miami. And my thought process on Dan was, he tells a good story. He's a rah-rah. He gets guys fired up. And then ultimately you got to coach. And I feel like he falls flat. So it's just a whole lot of bluster, and everybody gets excited, and then it wears off. And then you go back to, you're a pumpkin again, right? The carriage vanishes. In Detroit, so he starts off in Detroit, and it's not good. Like, and yet coming out of the first season, where I don't even remember how they barely won any games the first year. It was like a couple wins. And I remember I was talking to a family
they had the
member.
Second pick of the draft.
Yeah, they had the second pick of that. Yeah, 8. That's when they took 8. So I think they might have had 2 wins. And so I was talking to a member of my family, and I was like, why the hell do Lions fans love this guy so much? I was like, I don't get it. I'm like, he just won 2 games. When Marty Mornhinweg won 2 games, people wanted that guy fired. Like, they hated him instantly. I mean, like, the tide turned against him so hard. I'm like, but what is it about this guy? Everybody seems to believe in him. Everybody seems to love him. And you know what this person said to me? And it summed it up so perfectly. He said, because he wants to be here. Because he wants to be in Detroit. He wants to be part of Detroit. And we're so used to people shitting on Detroit.
Detroit versus everybody.
Yeah. And we're just so used to people talking trash and running Detroit down. And it's a hole. Why would you want to be there? All these different things. That we have this guy he'll get you fired up, and he talks in a way that you kind of want to hang out with him and have a beer, invite him to the barbecue. Like, and then he says, I love it here. I want to be here. I want to be with you. And so this person's just like, it's so nice to be accepted and get on board with that guy. And if he turns it in the right direction, it's going to be unbelievable. And then he did. And I remember I watched the Hard Knocks. One ass cheek and 3 toes. I was just about to say, one ass cheek and 3 toes. That was the name of one of my fantasy teams one year. I just remember I'm watching Hard Knocks, and I'm like, I'm not going to get sucked in by this guy. I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And then every week I'm like, shit. I'm like, oh no. And then by the end of Hard Knocks, I told Frank Schwab, who I work with at Yahoo, I was like, and I don't know. I was like, I kind of hope that they have success. I'm like, I'm sort of rooting for this guy. I'm pulling for them to have success. And then it kind of dawned on me too. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds, because realistically, especially those cornerstone franchises that you don't need to be born into it. Okay. Lakers, Yankees, Duke, wherever, Packers, blah, blah, blah. So, there's a flip side of that too, though. These teams that you don't have to be born into it, people find reasons to hate them, to dislike them, to root against them. I think Detroit, it's the opposite, because they've never really done anything to make you hate them. Like, they're not really, you love Barry, right? You were like, man, they're inept. Like, you get your jokes off.
You felt sorry for Calvin Johnson.
You felt sorry for players who went through there, and you're like, how many Hall of Fame careers are, basically never going to win a Super Bowl because of this franchise? But then now, when this is happening, I think people connect with Dan Campbell when you listen to him. I think he has a really diverse coaching staff, and he's like, it's like, it's all of these
full of
things,
ex-players. And diverse,
diverse, full of ex-players. Like, he's doing all these things where you're like, oh shit, that's kind of the model you would like to see happen with NFL teams. He cares about guys. He's a big dude who could whoop your ass, but he kind of cries in press conferences. There was the high school shooting, there, and he made that a really prominent part of, like, talking about healing the community, and made it part of, like, what the football fabric was. So I think, like, as they have success, you will get other casual fans who will look at them and not root against them. They'll go, yeah, that's kind of a fun team. It's fun.
In passing, I mentioned, my fantasy team name. The other part is, like, the proliferation and the popularity of fantasy football. They're not just winning, they're scoring points. Jared Goff is a viable fantasy starter. David Montgomery, prior to injury, viable fantasy starter, like one of the top running backs in fantasy this year. Jahmyr Gibbs, a top dynasty running back. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. Like, there are guys on offense that, even if you are not a diehard Lions fan, casually, you still may be invested in the Lions because you want Ben Johnson's offense to do its thing. So they go 3-13-1 in 2021. Get Aiden Hutchinson. Not only did Dan Campbell win me over, Aiden Hutchinson, who I've had the pleasure to encounter a couple of times, interviewed him at the Super Bowl, ran into him before that Thursday night game against the Packers early this year. When my man crushed Billie Jean, I'm like, they got something. They got something.
That was a surprise. That was a surprise. I'm not gonna lie.
That's the kind of guy you build your franchise around, right?
That was a moment. You know what? We all collectively had a moment there where we're watching and we're like, oh no, don't. He's not gonna do this, is he? And you know, I'm just like my face is in my hands. I'm like, you're gonna you can't do this. And then he pulled it off. And you're like, oh my God.
Leaned in. He committed.
And
he won that team over in that moment.
That was it. Because you know,
that entire locker room became his.
Yeah. They cut to that auditorium, and all these dudes are like, he's doing it, like he's doing it, like he's going. Yeah. And it really is one of those. It's just, to me, it's one of those teams where they haven't done anything to make you dislike them. There's a lot of reasons to like them. And then as teams fall off and you're looking for a good story that, you know, even as fans, you're just looking for somebody to root for. Like this, and I want to say something about Lions fans too. Another thing to me that spoke to me was when they dealt Stafford, the fans wanted him to have success. They were happy. When he won a Super Bowl, they weren't pissed.
The Lions Super Bowl was kind of like theirs. It was like, hey, you know what? This is how we get a piece of this. Yeah,
it
absolutely.
Was. I think they were happy to. No, they didn't. They did the same thing with Verlander. When Verlander got dealt to the Astros and won a World Series, they were so happy for him. Like Detroit fans, they kind of know. Like once you're one of them, even if you leave, they're still like, you're still one of us. And then I think the flip side of that too, to see Jared Goff. I mean, let's be real. He got run out. Like he and McVay was like, I can't do this with this guy. He can't change. His ceiling is this limited thing. He soured on him, and Goff goes to Detroit. And I'm like, I mean, I'm thinking he'll be in Detroit for a year. Like I trust Sean McVay. And then all of a sudden,
even going back to last year's draft, people have been trying to replace Jared Goff in Detroit.
And yet he's turned and he feels like a guy who's bought into the same, like Dan, the city.
He wants to be there.
Yeah, I want to be here. This is my second coming here. Like I am happy. I'm a Lion. Like it's. And again, I always say this about Cleveland. Like Dawn, my significant other Dawn. I remember when we're sitting there and we're watching the Cavaliers in the finals, and they win. Right, they win the title in the finals, and Dawn's sitting to the right of me. I turn and I look, and she's sobbing. Just sobbing as a fan. And it's like was such a release. She grew up in Ohio. She lived in Cleveland. Yeah. And she was she's not free right now. I'll get her on right now. Yeah, both could do the podcast. Is she free? No.
Okay, cool.
No, you never bring me back, man. It would be my last appearance. It would just be Dawn from this point on.
But she was overjoyed though.
She was just so overjoyed and crying and like and you know, I was like, "You okay?" And she's like, "I'm just so happy." And like and to me, I'm like, that's the kinship between Detroit fans and Cleveland fans as you go through all these years of like just being beat down constantly, that once you have something to love and to grab onto, it turns out to be this great thing. And I think really that's what's going on with Detroit fans. I think that it will be the biggest, no matter what happens, the success that they have from this point on, it will overtake everything in that city, regardless of what anybody else does.
I definitely want to get to Cleveland. That reminds me of when the Saints won the Super Bowl after the 2009 season. I was in Miami, not at the game, but in Miami, and I cried. That was my inner child crying. That was the kid that used to rush home from church, grab some Popeyes, and watch the Saints game with my grandfather and my brother and my dad and my uncle.
That's awesome.
That kid was touched. Even though I stopped rooting for the Saints in '92, I still put on for my city. I still root for all things New Orleans, right? And like you with Detroit and with Michigan, I know what the Saints mean to that community, just as Dawn knows what Cleveland sports means to Cleveland's community. Quick self-promotion, but it's not really about me. It's about the story. We talked about good stories. Even Brad Holmes, general manager, if you haven't already, please, if you listen to this, go and search the NFL on NBC YouTube page for my interview with Brad Holmes from the Combine. Brad Holmes has an incredible story. in terms of how he rose through the ranks to become a general manager who has constructed a deep roster that's withstanding quite a few injuries. And even another story from Hard Knocks, and this might have been one of the best plays of Sunday. I know you highlighted it on your Twitter account. I saw it live. Craig Reynolds. Craig Reynolds has an amazing personal story. Here he is stepping in for an injured David Montgomery, cleaning Carlton Davis's clock.
Unbelievable.
And freeing up Amon-Ra St. Brown to score a touchdown at Tampa, 20-6 Lions, holding the Bucs. Baker Mayfield's like, I sucked. The Lions defense got a lot to do with that. Holding the Bucs without a touchdown on the road. Lions fans taking over the place. All right, for years they had style in the form of Barry Sanders and, Calvin Johnson, all the numbers he was putting up. You mentioned Matthew Stafford, the run and shoot offenses that I referenced from the 90s and what have you. Wayne Fonts and those guys. Scott Mitchell even. It's just they were fun. They did Jim Caldwell dirty. They had some success there and firing him, they probably had some karma holding him back in the years since. But my point is this team, Charles, has a depth, a substance, and a toughness that is really befitting of Detroit. Like more than any Lions team that I can remember, the identity of this team feels Detroit, if that makes sense. It's gritty.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that, again, brought up Goff, but I never would have said this about Jared Goff, but there is a little bit of grit to him, in terms of like a guy picking himself up, right? Like to me, I always thought Goff was this finesse guy, and you can't do this, not particularly athletic.
Went to Cal, he's a California surfer guy,
and then gets dealt out, gets disrespected, right? I mean, basically that was horrible the way that it ended for him in LA. And then he picked himself up. And I think there's aspects of football players when you see them pick themselves up in games making mistakes, but then also in their careers. It's like Geno Smith, right? Like all that shit for years with Geno Smith. One of the things I've respected most about him was that dude never gave up on himself. Never.
Right.
And then when I was like,
they wrote him off, but they never wrote back.
Exactly. That's right. I was one of the ones who wrote him off. And I was like, he can't. And he was like, yeah, I can. And I'm like, all right, we'll see. And then he did, and it's like, there are those players on that roster. And it's interesting too, when you go back to what they did in the offseason, and they move on from DeAndre Swift, right? They clean out the entire backfield, right? And they go and get David Montgomery. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I don't know what to think of this. Like, I don't know what to think of this signing. I don't like what exactly do they think that they're setting up here? What are they getting out of this? And then when I watched them, I was like, oh no, like now I get it. They have a hard runner, a guy who's going to go in there and pound teams, and they have Jahmyr Gibbs as the change of pace guy, but it's a very dedicated, talented guy who's going to grind on teams when they want to grind them offensively. But as you said, it's not just that. They have they throw the football, Laporta. I mean, if Jameson Williams comes in and gives them
Jameson Williams
even a little bit of what he scores that touchdown this weekend, and you're like, if he can just have a couple big plays a game with that speed, he's going to affect that offense significantly. Holmes is he's like a star in Detroit. Like, it's funny because when you talk to people, like if he's out in public, people taking pictures with him, they're getting like, he has created what they love. He's one of them. And not only that, internally, when you look at personnel wise, he didn't shy away from, they added like a lot, John Dorsey's in there as a mind they're tapping, and, Spielman has a big voice and all this. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work, because normally general managers, they try to box out other voices. They try to make, they streamline it into themselves. He did the opposite. Like there's a very much a community effort in there where they work together. They listen to each other. They bring a lot of that to the table. And that in and of itself is really impressive to also watch, is that it's not, you don't hear ego stuff coming out of there. You don't hear when Spielman gets his run, you don't hear, well, Brad Holmes isn't particularly like it's the opposite. They actually love each other and love to hold each other up, and it's God, this is not. I never thought I'd be gushing like about the Lions ever. I can't believe I'm actually here. I seriously, like, I'm listening to myself and I'm like, God, when did I get to this? What happened? When did I come back?
They're a lovable team. They seem to love one another inside that locker room, and they're a lovable team whether you are a born and raised diehard Lions fan or a casual fan. There's a lot to like. There's a lot to love. Before we move on, I've been teasing moving on, and maybe we should just stay in the moment. Maybe I shouldn't even ask this, just enjoy the moment. But how far can this thing go, though? Like, again, 3-0 on the road, like withstanding injury after injury, and it's very much next man up when it comes to that roster. They seem to have all the pieces. How far can it go?
I will. So the defense is still young, right? They're still in the process of building that thing out. Okay. And so to me, I think the fear is when you come up against a team, let's say a healthy 49ers team, as prolific as they can be, and the weapons they have everywhere, running back, tight end, multiple wide receivers, they can game plan and throw different aspects at you. Brock Purdy himself is a great player this weekend, notwithstanding. They have honestly probably the best player on their roster, not named Nick Bosa, is Trent Williams. I mean, like, it's just when you run into a team like that and that has a little bit of experience, right, and has gotten knocked down and played in playoff games, like, to me, that's when I'm like, Detroit would really have to catch lightning in a bottle to then match up against teams with more experience. And especially because that's the thing about, you and I know, playoff games, it's just the level of how that ratchets up is so significant. And Goff obviously knows it. There are some guys on that roster that have seen a little bit of that, especially Goff, and that's important at the quarterback spot. But I think in the NFC, I think they can hold their own now with anybody. And particularly looking at Philly and saying, okay, the Jets kind of just showed us again how to game plan for Philly and play against Philly. And then looking at San Francisco, where you see a bunch of these injuries kind of pile up and you're like, ooh. And honestly, sort of the game plan, the same thing about keeping the quarterback in the pocket, making them beat you from in the pocket, throwing the football, not letting the offense be as versatile as it can be in Philly or San Francisco. So there is a little bit of a game plan to help them compete against teams like that. But I'm a big believer in experience, and I still think they got to get some playoff experience before you really. I hear people saying like, hey, they're potentially a Super Bowl contender in the NFC. I don't want to discount that, but I just want people to remember you make your bones by getting in the playoffs and getting experience.
Well, and Lions fans, I think, could start to kind of let go of the inherent skepticism that they often feel about teams. Yeah. This is not a pretender. This team is a legit contender. All right, but I do want to keep with the theme, though, of perennial laughing stocks, and just how lovable a couple of these teams are. These just good stories, just feel good stories. And I think, look, it's fair to say as we move on to the Browns, who knocked off the previously unbeaten 49ers, I don't know that there was anything lovable about them outside of Cleveland. For a lot of people, a lot of people did and still feel some kind of way about the contract that they gave Deshaun Watson in order to get Deshaun Watson to agree to a trade to the Cleveland Browns before last season. But here they go into San Francisco. Oh, excuse me, I'm not against San Francisco. I beg your pardon. They were at home. And I remember I was doing a fantasy football pregame yesterday, and I got to eat it. I got to eat it on this because they had the little scuffle with the Niners pregame. And I was like, well, that might be the most fight that the Browns put up today because I'm like, San Francisco is this big, bad bully, and they beat up everybody. You saw what they just did to Dallas. They took Dallas's lunch money. Like, San Francisco is the Debo of the NFL. Like, that's my bike, punk. That's the 49ers. But here come the Browns like, no, y'all ain't coming on our block and pushing us around. with PJ Walker at quarterback, again, no Nick Chubb. They've suffered some injuries themselves. I mean, they've been beat up front, which is their bread and butter, right? The Cleveland Browns offensive line, they've been beat up. And again, no Deshaun Watson, who hasn't been Houston Deshaun Watson, but still, like, nobody in their right mind gives them a chance against arguably the best team in the league with PJ Walker at quarterback. And sure, Jake Moody missed the field goal, and we're not even having this conversation, but they won that game. And in fact, this was the most mind-blowing stat for me, Charles. The win over the 49ers was Cleveland's first win over an opponent that entered the game 5-0 or better since November 2nd, 1969.
Oh,
so they have not had a win this impressive since 1969. A regular season win like this, Cleveland has not had. To do it against San Francisco, to do it without Deshaun Watson, dare I say it, there's something about this Browns team that even Cleveland fans who might be uncomfortable still with Deshaun, even though he's one of theirs now, they might be uncomfortable. Fans around the country who might be uncomfortable about that situation. Even if you're not a Browns fan, how could you not cheer that victory yesterday against San Francisco, given all the odds that were stacked against them?
Yeah, I mean, even Craig got up, right? When he had to knock Devo out, he got up, right? I mean,
right.
He got off the ground, and that's basically
Grab that brick.
Grab that brick. Yeah, the brick helps. There's no doubt that brick definitely helped. So to me, the brick it's the Browns' defensive front, right? It's that defensive line. It's the.
God.
It's Jim.
They're
Schwartz.
giving up 1,000 yards.
Yeah,
they get up 1,000 yards total. Yeah. it's like 2 games for the Dolphins. They get up 1,000 yards total.
I think at this point in the season, and again, this is off the top of my head, but I think it was like the 3rd least in NFL history at this point in the season.
Yes,
in terms of yardage.
I believe you are correct. Yeah,
that's insane. And the really interesting thing about this too was, so before the season kicked off, I had a chance to talk. I saw the Browns a couple of times, like passing through camps and stuff, and they had joint practices with Philly. And when I would talk to Stefanski or Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, or Andrew Berry, the GM, they kept talking about the defense. They were really excited about the defense. Like and it wasn't just Schwartz. Like Schwartz was a huge part of it, and a change that I feel like they felt like, okay, when they saw how it energized Myles Garrett and brought that unit together, I think they knew right away, man, maybe we should have made this change here earlier than we did. Whatever, at least we made it. But then there were other players like, and I never, by the way, and for years, I have been trying to say Okoronkwo's name, and I always have to do it just like that. I mean, it's so like that was an addition where they're like, look, nobody's talking about this, right? But we think this guy is going to add depth to the front end of our defense. He's gonna create pressure on the quarterback. He's gonna allow us to keep some guys fresh. He's gonna work well with Myles. JOK. Guys in the secondary. The entire unit, I think, that's the leadership of that team. That's, as much as we want to talk about Deshaun and everything, the spine of who they are and what makes them so tough. And I think what people fear, it's definitely that defense. One other thing though that blows my mind, I never really thought about this, but like straight up, like Amari Cooper was,
dude,
he was
amazing.
What a pickup that has been. Like that was a 5th round pick. I mean, like, and it was one of those moves where when Andrew Berry made it, I thought to myself, like, man, I don't know, he's making like, his money's up there. And Andrew knew where the wide receiver market was going. And I remember having the conversation with him, and he was like, just wait, like it's gonna, as the years move forward, it's gonna look more equitable than you think it does. And they got the performance out of him. And now I look at the Cowboys, and there are times where I'm like, they really missed that guy. Like, as much as like he was driving them nuts at the end and they just felt like they had to move off of him. Now I see moments where the Cowboys really miss him. It's I give them props because when Chubb goes down, to me, I'm just like, oh no, that's the heart. And then when Watson has this, rotator cuff issue, I was with you. I would have lost if I was still in a knockout league. I would have gotten destroyed because I would not have respected Cleveland's defense as much as I should have, and I would have picked the 49ers in that game, and I would have gotten knocked out. And as I'm sure a lot of people did in their knockout leagues.
So a couple of things. Just you were spot on, but I'll just for emphasis sake. They've allowed 1,002 yards through their first 5 games. That's the third fewest any defense has allowed through the first 5 games since 1970. Only the 71 Baltimore Colts and the 70 Vikings, the freaking purple people eaters, have better marks. But do you understand? I mean, and it's like, I look at, you mentioned Chubb going down, and in steps Jerome Ford. They bring back Kareem Hunt, okay? Mm-hmm. P.J. Walker, well-traveled. David Njoku playing with, like, his face has been burned off, for crying out loud, and he's playing through this, right? Jim Schwartz revitalizing this defense the way he is. Like, that's a very blue-collar town. Here's a Cleveland Browns defense. This should be a tough team. But do you understand what I'm saying about the Deshaun of it all? And listen, like, I'm not here to relitigate that. I'm just trying to account for it because I still think that's part of the story. And on one hand, I'm sure that some people are like, yo, man, why are you bringing up old shit? Like, he served a suspension. Like, move on. Okay. There are other people who will never move on from those accusations. Some people who will never look at him or that franchise the same way. That's the deal that the Browns made. But what I'm saying is, in spite of how you may feel about Deshaun Watson or about the Browns by extension, there is something that everybody can root for when a team achieves. And again, it's still early. The Browns could brown. Once upon a time, I remember asking, why must the Browns brown so brown all the time? We talk about the same thing with the Lions, the history, the inherent, the heartbreak that comes with being a Browns fan. There's still time for them to revert to their old ways. But right here and now, after beating San Francisco and the way this team is hanging tough and the way this defense is playing, it's a likable team. If the Lions are lovable, the Browns are at least likable. This story, right?
I think sans Deshaun, because that's what I think ends up casting. Here's the thing about the Browns, like pre-Deshaun, when they had some success. People forget they made the playoffs with Baker Mayfield. They beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoffs with Baker Mayfield, and they were a good story. They were a lot of fun. A lot of people liked Kevin Stefanski. They liked Andrew Berry. They liked good Baker Mayfield. There was a lot to like about the organization. I think, though, I think the contract, and then, as you said, and I know people are, some people are really bringing up old shit, but the off the field stuff with Deshaun, the civil suits, all those things, that's what people are always going to see when they look at the Browns. Mm-hmm. They're always going to see it through that prism, and so that's always going to be a segment where, no matter what, they don't care about anybody else on that roster. That cancels out any thought process of wanting to root for the Cleveland Browns. But as
it's hard to look at them as a David through that prism. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But, and you and I know people in that organization. There's a lot of good people in that organization. There's a lot of good character people in the locker room, okay, and in the front office, and in the front office, staff.
Coaching staff, absolutely. Yeah.
Another thing too, I will say, the Hazlitt ownership does also take, like, some people do not like the Haslitts as owners.
There's some baggage there, yeah.
There's some baggage there too. So, not that, not to hit the Lions here, but the Lions ownership history, if you trace it far enough back, has got some pretty big baggage as well, too.
Honestly, so let's just as a blanket statement, pretty much any ownership group, if you really want to look into it, be like, know what? We're going to compartmentalize here. We're going to practice some cognitive dissonance and root for you in spite of ownership. No, absolutely.
You dig deep enough in these closets, like it's gonna.
It's hard to be a billionaire through proper means. Like, so somewhere along the line, you got some blood on those billions. Somewhere along the line. But to your point, there's some good people in the Cleveland Browns organization that you can root for.
Story.
Yeah, it's a good story.
And I agree.
It's a good story.
And I do think it is a good story. It's That game, just to see them put it together as best they could. And again, as you said, one missed field goal, maybe we're having a different conversation. I guess to me, I want to see now, what do you do the next game? Like, that was the thing with the Lions. When the Lions started out the way that they did, most Lions fans are like, yeah, we'll see. Like, we believe, but we'll see. Like, they're always waiting. Like, oh, what's going to, when's the bad thing going to happen? The Browns, I think there's that element. It's like, okay, you got this one. Now, what are you going to do?
Where's the other shoe going to drop?
Right. Are you going to, if you lose next week, then it's just sort of like, all right, well, we're back to, they pulled the rabbit out of a hat one weekend. But I will say this, that defense is built to last all season long. If they can get healthy offensively, I think, by the way, running backs, I think they're okay running back wise, but I still, let's wait until October 31st. I don't know if a running back or not. I would not be surprised though if the Browns are trade active going into the deadline at the end of this month, maybe to try get I would think probably a piece on offense.
Okay. Well, speaking of get healthy, what is the deal with Deshaun? Like the rotator cuff situation, or is the rotator cuff? That's the injury, correct?
Yeah, it's an underlying muscle. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to try to pronounce the actual muscle that's being affected. But so it's if you listen to the Twitter, like there's a number of former physicians, NFL physicians, Twitter doctors that were tied to teams or whatever. So I've tried to decode this through reading what they're saying about it. I mean, it just pretty much it affects your arm strength, your ability to be able to throw with velocity, and now I've heard, okay, it's also a pain thing that some guys can play through the pain of this, other guys can't. And so to me, it's sort of like, is this a pain threshold thing, or is it he literally can't throw hard?
Well, because if it's a pain thing, let's just call it throwing shoulder. If it's a pain threshold thing, it becomes a perception thing. And leading up to this 49ers game, it had gotten kind of funky, at least from a national media standpoint, and maybe even locally, like in terms of, the interpretation of Kevin Stefanski's comments vis-a-vis David Njoku versus Deshaun Watson. Was it truly an organizational collective decision for Deshaun not to play in the previous game, or did he just decide not to play because he was medically cleared, but to your point, maybe it was pain, performance, we don't know. He decided not to play. Then he doesn't really answer any specifics about it. And so, with that contract, is he obligated to push through the pain or whatever? There's a lot. It got kind of funky. Then it was, hey, we don't know when he's going to come back, says, I believe, Mary Kay Cabot, I believe it was. Like, it could be indefinite. Then Schefter comes back, as soon as week 7. So there was a lot of, like, shit flying around when it came to Deshaun Watson and whether or not his inability to play was his choice, the organization's choice, and whether or not they were at odds.
And there's, when things like this happen, there's always a subtext out there, and it usually comes from inside the organization. Sometimes it's players, sometimes it's coaches, sometimes it's people in the front office, sometimes it's even ownership, where it's is this person like pushing themselves hard enough to play through something? And to me, that's the morass that we're kind of in right now, because it's all these conflicting, confusing assessments. And then, as you said, Deshaun not saying anything. We just went through this last year with Lamar Jackson. Like, are we forgetting that? Where it was like, can he play or can't he play? Why is this injury taking so long? Is that tied to the contract? Like, and it was like nobody was talking. The organization wasn't saying enough. And finally, Lamar Jackson just stood up and was like, yo, here's the injury I have. Here's how, like, I can't walk. Like, here's what's going on. And it pissed off the organization, but he felt like he needed to do that. Well, maybe at some point, or either Deshaun or his representation or some other players or somebody's going to feel the need to be like, listen, everybody relax. This is real. It's serious. We're going to get through it. I think if there was just a unified timetable, maybe people would feel a little bit better about this. If everybody could just get on the same page and go 2 to 4 weeks, right? Then you go, okay, now we know 2 to 4 weeks, we're operating under that.
Yep. All right. The other perennial laughing stock that I want to touch on, keeping with that theme, as I mentioned, was the Jets. All right, so the Browns knock off the Niners, the Jets knock off the Eagles. What's crazy about the Zach Wilson thing is everybody was united in their observation that Zach Wilson was not very good, okay? Then I think it was the Rodney Harrison post-game interview with Chris Jones, quote-unquote interview. That felt like it kind of turned the tenor of the conversation to where everybody was like, hey, leave Zach Wilson alone. Leave him, like, you know, and by the way, on top of that, he had a good game against Kansas City. So he has probably his best career performance against Kansas City. Rodney Harrison piles on him post-game. Now everybody's kind of like trying to defend Zach Wilson. Okay, cut to, they beat Denver, okay? And now they beat Philadelphia going into their bye week. Offense still isn't doing a lot. But they seem to have a formula. Hey, Zach, don't screw it up too bad. Convert 2 third downs, that's fine, but don't screw it up too bad. Breece Hall makes some plays. Defense, even down top 2 corners, is going to keep us in it against Jalen Hurts and those receivers. They win the game, but maybe as if not more important as being 3-3, here's Aaron Rodgers on the field throwing passes pregame. Yeah, and so if you're a Jets fan right now, as tortured as your existence, your very existence has been as a Jets fan for as long as you can remember, and there was probably no harder gut punch that I can recall in football history than Aaron Rodgers tearing his Achilles 4 snaps into the most hyped Jets season that we can remember. How good must you feel as a Jets fan, not just about the prospects of keeping the ship afloat until maybe miraculously your captain can come back, but just, this team fights. This team claws, much like the Browns, much like the Lions. Like, it's just a team we can love. It's a team we can root for because they haven't thrown in the towel. They're still fighting, and they're still beating teams with Zach freaking Wilson.
I mean, okay, there's a couple of things we can just go ahead and take it off the play. Like, the defense is fine, okay? Like, they're down a couple corners, but that's a good defense. Built to be good, has dominant players up front. You get the corners healthy. The defense is what it's going to be. It's not that unless Quinnen Williams goes down and, you lose Sauce. And I mean, it's built to be a good unit. We don't have to. They're going to win some games defensively. I think if
they're
going
to be in a lot of games, they're going to be in a lot of games
for sure. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. And to me, I understand Jets fans are excited about Aaron Rodgers out there throwing passes. This reminds me of, I remember when Drew Brees went down and Teddy Bridgewater stepped in, and it was like, how long is Drew going to be out? And the crowd's chanting Teddy, and he's rolling up wins with the Saints, and it's like, hey, they're going to be fine. And the next thing you know, Drew's on his Instagram throwing footballs. And you're like, Drew's trying to remind everybody, like, yo, I'm coming back. All right. Like, I'm not, like, don't forget about me. Like, I know you chanting Teddy's name, but I'm the guy. I think there's a little bit of that in Rodgers, like he's letting people see him go from each stage of this. He's going and talking about it on his platform that we all know about, that he, every Tuesday. And then he gets out there and he throws. Now, if he's able to pull that off, to me, seems like a medical miracle. Okay. That's amazing. And it's going to be fascinating. But I still think
that would be in less time than Cam Akers came back. Cam Akers is the one that comes to like that was the one that's wow, this dude came back from Achilles. This is less. Yeah.
It would be, I mean,
unprecedented.
I can't believe it's even a possibility. But like you said, he's out there throwing. I think if you're a Jets fan, though, what you should be happier about is, at least until that potentially becomes a reality with Rodgers, what you really should be happy about and invested in right now, go back and watch that game. Zach Wilson gets sacked 5 times, got beat up in that game. They let him throw it, I want to say 33 times. I think he had 19 completions off the top of my head. Didn't crack 200
Garrett
yards.
Wilson.
But that's my thing. Like, he had comfort moments in that game where you're like, like he just did a thing that seemed pretty natural. Like, just like a pretty natural, didn't feel like he was caving in, didn't feel like it was too big. He hadn't been great, but he did a couple of things where I'm like, that's a little more comfortable than I remember this guy being. And it was just like the Kansas City game, right? Where you're like, whoa, you see him put a drive together and you're like, okay, that's a little bit of new information. Like, is this sort of the direction? So I wonder in my mind, I'm like, is Zach Wilson starting to get comfortable enough to just be a middle of the road quarterback, which by the way would be huge. That would be great for them if they could just get him to be a solid middle of the road quarterback who's comfortable out there and functional, not turning the ball over a ton, using his legs at times. And part of me wonders too, if mentally, when I talk to people with the Jets about Rodgers and even post injury, it was like, the things that he imparts on Zach is just repetitively do the same things right over and over and over. Don't let yourself go into a mental hole. And eventually it will just start to feel natural doing things right over and over. And then when you fail, you won't think, oh my God, I'm a failure. And now it's all going to fail. You'll just get up, go, man, I that up. And you'll move on and you'll get back to being repetitive in small, successful things. It's never been a tools thing with Zach. We've always known that. It's always been a mental thing with Zach. And I do think that Aaron Rodgers has helped that considerably. If they can run the football, okay, and take some pressure off that offensive line, if they don't have to have Zach throw it 40 times a game, 30 might be too much, let's be honest. I think they might be able to stay afloat long enough to see if maybe Rodgers coming back becomes viable. Teams always talk. Mike, what would you do though? Yeah. Let me ask you this: what if Zach gets into a decent groove
going
and gets it going a little bit, and then all of a sudden we're looking at we're approaching January, and it's like, hey, Rodgers might be able to come back. What would you do in that scenario? You still got to sit Zach, right? Like.
Yeah. Like that's not a a couple of things. One, thankfully, because I thought it was always like it was ignorant and short-sighted, and it was people just throwing shit out there to see what sticks. But like, well, maybe you tell me. You would know better than me. The Kirk Cousins stuff that immediately started after Rodgers got hurt and the Vikings that was never going to happen. Okay,
never.
Right. But now I think, hey, they can win this way. They got a formula. Shout out to the DOC. They don't need to go and make a splash trade for a quarterback mid-season. So that's one thing. Two, absolutely. If Rodgers is able to come back, if he works hard enough to get himself back, this isn't Brady Bledsoe. Like, I don't care if they're rolling, if they make the playoffs with Zach Wilson. Hey, it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, but it could be upgraded. You got Aaron Rodgers for that reason. But you at least have a backup if for some reason Rodgers isn't getting it done or, he's rusty or, God forbid, gets hurt again. It's a first world problem to have. Like the Jets should just hope they get to a point where that's actually a decision that has to be made. If they get to a point where they have to consider whether or not to sit Zach Wilson for a healthy Aaron Rodgers, that means a lot of things broke right for them. But I mean, more than anything, I would say like this past game, there are a lot of times teams be like, oh, we just play whoever's in front of us. Like, everybody, they get paid too. The records don't matter. So, another one, there are no moral victories. So, okay, you hung tough in the second half with Kansas City. He had his best game. You beat Denver, which the bottom seems to be falling out in Denver. Maybe they won't say it, they won't admit it publicly, or maybe they have for all I know. I haven't read everything that came out of the Jets locker room yesterday. There's got to be some different level of satisfaction. As the kids say, this hit different. You beat the Eagles. So like, Robert Saleh saying, believe. Aaron Rodgers saying, don't point fingers, stick together. It's like, oh, okay, we hung tough with Kansas City. That's nice. We beat Denver. Okay, cool. It's like, you beat Philly. That hit different going into a bye week. And the Jets now can say, including Zach Wilson, wait a second. We can do this? Yeah, we can do this. We just beat the NFC champions.
And not only that, you did it in a way where you made Jalen Hurts throw it 45 times. Like, you took a guy who's absolutely not a one-dimensional player. And I think he still had like 40, almost 50 rushing yards. But you took a team and you did make them one-dimensional. It wasn't a big running game for them. They had to throw it. And again, it wasn't like it was a game that was completely out of hand or anything. You had an ability to still try to put your foot in the ground and establish a run game. And instead, what they did was they looked at Jalen Hurts and they said, all right, we're going to confine you as much as we can in the pocket, and we're going to make you throw as much as we can. And we're going to hope that we can force you into mistakes, whether it's tip passes, whether it's you don't see somebody coming underneath, whatever it is. And from a coaching standpoint, it's impressive. Because you took a really good team, an elite level team, and you took an elite level quarterback and you said, we're going to turn him into X, and then we're going to see what happens. And they turned him into X. He became a throwing quarterback. I don't think, to me, Philly's top end is not watching Jalen Hurts throw it 45 times. It's being able to run and establish, roll up 150 yards running, and then Jalen Hurts can do all that other stuff on top. So it was impressive. And I think, from a coaching standpoint, from a schematic standpoint, what they did has got to be another one that hits different too.
Yep. Hey, we're at the top of the hour. It's 2:00 here. Do you have some more time? Because I want to bring in some company. Given what you wrote for Yahoo, and given what she's been writing and her expertise, I think Shalise would be a great person to add to the conversation, Charles, to talk about the Patriots. Once upon a time, they were a laughingstock back in the Sullivan Stadium days. Now, it's been a long time since they've been this bad. So, so stand by. We're going to bring in Shalise and talk Patriots, okay? You got some more time?
Nope. Yeah, let's do it.
Sweet. Shalise, you and I go back to the front row at Patriots press conferences back in the day. You've covered this team through its entire dynasty, through the departure of Tom Brady. I don't know. As bad as it's been in the last couple of years, it was relatively bad. I don't know that we could have anticipated, or maybe we could have. Maybe the writing was on the wall, or maybe people like you saw this coming. The bottom falling out the way that it has to 1-5, and quite possibly with the Bills and Dolphins, I believe, coming up, 1-7. How did it get this bad this quickly, Shalise, in New England?
It's funny you mentioned the last couple of years. I grew up here. So like my very first sporting memory was Super Bowl 20 and going to my uncle's house for a Super Bowl party, because that was like the high watermark of the Patriots for that Super Bowl against the Chicago Bears. And then, Parcells and Bledsoe and things start going on the upswing, and then Belichick and Tom Brady, and, Patriots fans who are like 30 years old, they have no idea what's happening right now. They're just, their whole world is just off. It's you have to point it back to Bill. There is no one else to blame for this situation but Bill Belichick. He is the GM. He's the head coach. He's surrounded himself on the personnel side and on the coaching rooms with his friends or the sons of his friends or his own sons. He, to borrow the line from Bill Parcells, he picks the groceries, he cooks the meal, he hires the waiters and servers. It's all on him. So if the meal sucks, there's no one to point to but him. And right now it's just terrible.
Yeah,
mistakes, historic Patriots futility, and a smashed tablet. Bill Belichick is coaching his anti-masterpiece. That's Charles on Yahoo from this morning.
Yeah, I don't, Shalise hits exactly perfectly what the overriding problem is. That I talked to someone who used to work there in the front office and was moved on and is in another franchise. And I was, we're kind of going over this thing with Kraft, and, Shalise hits on it. This guy said to me, he was like, you realize it's not just getting rid of Bill, right? He was like, you are getting rid of fundamentally a religion and everyone who was part of that religion in the building. He was like, and
that's what Shalise wrote about last week. This is a house cleaning, if anything.
This is the most cleaningest of cleanings. Like, I mean, you're talking like,
right.
Front office, coaching staff, like, there's maybe biz ops people, the little secret agents he has running around the building, like
everything short of relocating and renaming the team would probably need to be changed.
Look,
in other words,
maybe there's like a parking attendant who would have to be fired. like who knows how bad this? But Shalise, she hits it. I mean, the general manager is going to get the coach fired, or however it's going to end up. And Shalise said it. He's made this. He is a creator who hates his creation, but it's his creation. Yeah. Now he's a prisoner of it.
You can't, like, I've seen some people, some Patriots fans or, say, well, would Robert Kraft go to him and say, you can be the head coach, but we need somebody else as a GM. Work. Bill's not going to allow that. Bill would never, ever allow that.
No,
he would never. His age, his ego, he would just never allow. And the thing of it is the roster hasn't been great for a while. Like for whatever reason, Bill cannot draft and develop a young receiver. Like, you could tell him his grandchild's life is at stake, and he cannot draft and develop wide receivers. He just can't do it. So, Tom Brady, I think I called him the most telegenic Band-Aid ever. Like, I knew he was great, but we're seeing now exactly how phenomenal he was, that he covered up for so many mistakes that Belichick, the GM, has made over the years.
Don't you think, too, you talk about, both of you, about like, he's not going to take Kraft meddling, right? Wouldn't that be the plan? Like, don't you think, like, it's like when Wayne Huizenga went to Don Shula behind the scenes and was like, got to make changes to your coaching staff. And Shula was like, not going to do it. And Huizenga's like, well, this is where we're at. And Shula's like, I'm retiring. I'm done. I'm stepping down. Like, I almost think like, that's the best case scenario for Kraft, is to be like, you need a GM. I'm going to point out these things that Shalise said. You can't draft wide receivers. Let's pull up a couple of Shalise columns, and we're going to tell you all these things.
And specifically, you need a GM that you didn't train, that doesn't think like you, that didn't come up in your system. Like, the problem that Shalise points out in her Yahoo column is like, everybody there has only done it one way, and that's the Patriot way. And now, absent Tom Brady, Charles, Belichick now looks a lot like the assistants that he used to dominate. They used to go other places and fall on their face, largely because they didn't have Tom Brady.
Yeah, we would always kind of, that was the joke, right? Like, oh, they left the nest. They left Bill and Tom. No, they just left Tom. It turns out, like, it wasn't just leaving Bill. It was they left Tom, and now Tom left Bill. And Tom has turned into Josh McDaniels in Denver, or Charlie Weiss at Notre Dame, or however he's back to being Cleveland Bill. And I know, there are people who are still like, well, Cleveland was good under Bill and they could have done this or they could have done that.
And look at that staff.
No, it's a whole different, Shalise, the thing that Shalise mentions too, that I don't think gets talked about enough, is like, this didn't just happen now. No, it's been a problem for a while. And like Shalise said, it got covered up by either Tom, or it got covered up by, okay, well, it's the first year out from Tom, but they have Mac now. And, it was always, there was some confluence of circumstance that we're like, all right, they'll get there. And I thought at times where I was like, hey, they're going to be up and running again. Look, they went and got Mac Jones. He looks viable and all these different things. But then Bill did his Bill thing. He had to do the Matt Patricia thing.
That was awful.
And I don't think it undermined maybe the one thing that I think could have helped to solve this at the quarterback spot. Although now I guess we can question whether or not Mac really does have it at all. But it did undermine the one chip he still had. Now he doesn't have that chip, and everything else is falling apart, and the roster looks how it looks. And it's just, there's nobody coming in to save this now.
The thing that gets me, though, is
Mac. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, but one thing that I have noticed and that I keep going back to, it's not just the lack of talent. They're making stupid mistakes that you would have never seen from them in the past. Like, look at yesterday.
Yep.
You have a little more than 2 minutes. You only need a field goal to win the game. They get called for a holding. They get called for a delay of game. And then Mac Jones takes the sack in the end zone. It's a safety. They did the same thing in week 1. I was at the game when they opened with the Eagles. Late in the fourth quarter, they have a chance to pull closer or take the lead. They take a stupid delay of game penalty. Like they keep making, and that's the thing. Again, it's a roster bereft of talent. So who knows? But the mistakes that they are making are just jaw-dropping when you have been around Belichick the way that we have, or seen him or listened to him over the years. And, Charles mentioned Patricia. Michael, you and I sat there and listened to Bill Belichick. What was the biggest thing he said with young players? The time in between year 1 and year 2 was critical to their development. And what did he do with their first-round quarterback? He gave them Tweedledee and Tweedledum as his offensive coordinator.
Mention Tweedledum by name. Say his name.
Matt Patricia and Joe Judge.
Joe Judge.
Well, but the other part of it is like, it's not just the errors, the mistakes, the undisciplined play, how sloppy they could be. Like Belichick was always on the cutting edge of coaching, decision making, Whereas now, maybe the highlight of this year was the run and start on the field goal block. All right, that was cool. We had never seen that before. But who punts, going back to the Dallas game, who punts down, I'm sorry, the Saints game, not the Dallas game. Who punts down 24-0 from the opposing 40 on 4th and 3? Like it's just stuff like that. It's like, yo, who is this guy? Like who even, how did the kids say, who even are you? I don't even know this Bill Belichick because he's getting out-coached. They're outmatched and out-coached, and you would have never thought Bill Belichick would have gotten out-coached. And the other thing, Shalise, I think people need to understand, the people who still subscribe to In Bill We Trust, the speculation about Bill Belichick being fired after this season, and we'll get to after or during in a second, with both of you guys, but the speculation about Bill Belichick's job security is not just impatient, spoiled fans or media. It's not bitter media who are experiencing some satisfaction in the form of schadenfreude for all the years that he made media's life miserable. This is coming from the fact that Robert Kraft said, yo, it's important that we make the playoffs this year. This is coming from this little subtle back and forth about spending and salary cap and cash over cap and how much the organization has actually spent that goes back and forth publicly between Belichick and Robert Kraft. This is, again, the unforgivable sin of having a defensive coach and a special team coach coaching offense last year. This is not coming out of nowhere, and this is not just only on the outside, Shalise. There's a lot of internal tension, is there not?
I would have to, I don't know 100%, but I would have to imagine that there is. And Robert Kraft has said it for 2 or 3 off seasons running now. This is unacceptable. We are about winning. And there was a story in The Athletic last week from Jeff Howe, and he said, Robert Kraft is not above letting it go. It would be wonderful and nice to see Bill Belichick break Don Shula's record while coaching the Patriots. But at this rate, that wouldn't happen for 2, 3, 4 years. So, and it almost seems like it's becoming more about Bill and his pursuit of that record and not just putting together the best possible team. And you're at a point now where you have Teddy Bruschi and Julian Edelman, who are as devoted foot soldiers of Bill Belichick's as you can find. And they're publicly, questioning Bill's decisions and questioning what's going on with the team. It's bad, and fan forums are a small but vocal number of people, but you look at comments on Patriot stories, you listen to sports radio around here if you want to punish yourself by doing so. There are a lot of people saying the time is over. And I think there's a tremendous amount of appreciation because obviously, yes, a lot of it was Tom Brady, but let's not forget the second time they played the Giants in the Super Bowl, statistically, that was the worst passing defense in the history of the NFL to that point. And he still got them to the Super Bowl. So he's a great coach and nobody would ever take away from him that he's not a great coach. But has the time run its course here in New England? Yes.
Feels that way.
Yeah.
Charles, this is what you wrote. I'm going to read from your column today. This is how bleak this has gotten. With the debate about the franchise deteriorating from should they move on from Belichick next offseason to should they even wait that long? That's an absurd discussion, of course. Belichick isn't going anywhere before the 23 season is in the books, and given the line of credit earned with 6 Super Bowl wins, maybe not even after, regardless of how bad this gets. So you still feel like there's a strong chance, given his resume and given what he's brought to this franchise, that he survives a season or survives going through a season that looks like it's going to get better before it gets worse, or gets worse before it gets better. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I think if Bill wants it, if Bill wants to stay. See, here's the thing. He did move off of Patricia. He knew he had to, okay? Like he heard what Kraft was saying. He understood the mistake. He's not been great at admitting mistakes, but he showed the ability to go, that didn't work. And I know that the owner's not going to have me do this again. Now, granted, he did go, as Shalise said, she went and got somebody inside the religion. It's the same thought process. And, maybe that's a mistake. Maybe it's not. But I do think that, A, it showcased his ability to make a change that did appease Kraft in some respect. But then I think, B, I think Bill and Robert Kraft, still have enough of a relationship for Bill to sit down and go, I do have a plan. Here's the plan, okay? Here's the pick we have. Here's the quarterbacks that we have available in the draft. You know that Mac did some things behind the scenes that I did not like, that made me uncomfortable. He was reaching out to people outside of the organization when he needed to trust us. That didn't sit well with me. You knew I was pissed off about that. And here is why Mac didn't work out. I think he still has the ability to affect. What did Greg Popovich say? Participate in your own resurrection. That's like, I still think he has the ability to do that with Robert Kraft. And I think Kraft isn't stupid. He doesn't want to turn this into a horrible end here. He doesn't want to turn it into a shit show. And it could. There's an ability for that to happen. If Bill wants it to be a shit show, it can be a shit show. And to speak a little bit to internally what's going on there, I'm with Shalise. It's the Iron Curtain's the Iron Curtain. It's hard to get behind there. But I remember I was in the preseason and in camp, making calls and talking to some people. And there was an ex-Patriots guy I'm talking to. And he said, hey, man, he's like, I'm going to send you a clip of Matt Groh, who's the head of player personnel there. He said, I'm going to send you a clip of him talking to reporters. He said, I've never, ever heard anything like this come out of the Patriots organization. I'm like, whoa, okay. Sends it to me. I listen. He goes, what did you hear? I was like, I heard a guy talking like he was the general manager of the team, to reporters. What is going on? He was like, I don't know what's going on, but I was in there for a while and I never saw that happen before. And he right away in the preseason, he was like, the Patricia change and then this happening, this guy speaking to reporters in the fashion that he did.
So maybe the hierarchy is not quite what we think.
It makes me feel like there's some stuff going on that we're not necessarily privy to, and maybe it comes out in the next book.
Right. Well, I mean, because I was going to say, it feels like, I guess the big question is just how frustrated is Kraft? Does Kraft still trust in Bill? Because if Kraft is over Bill, I don't think there's a middle ground. Now maybe what you just laid out, Charles, maybe the middle ground has already been found and we just haven't seen the results of it yet, or the results haven't been great yet, but maybe they have come to some kind of understanding about how Bill is going to operate, from a personnel standpoint. But given what we all think we know about Bill, and Shalise, we talked about earlier, Bill would never go for, you could be the coach but not the GM. It's it feels like the only change is wholesale change. Because it's hey, we're going to bring in a GM that Bill, of course, is going to have say in who that is and influence over that person, to say nothing of the fact that does that person want the job knowing that he's got to work with Bill Belichick? You know what I mean? There's not a pre-existing partnership. To say nothing of the fact of, do you want to just bring in more Bill guys, whether they all have different job titles or whatever? The problem is, they're too much of a monolith in that place. Like we talked about, not enough guys with outside perspectives, different experiences, different ways of doing things, so on and so forth. But the main thing I wanted to say, Shalise, was I just wonder how much the Brady departure, to Charles's point about this potentially being a shit show, how much did the Brady departure set the table for Bill's departure? Because two things on that. One, if Bill Belichick, the GM, were evaluating Bill Belichick, the coach, or if Bill Belichick, just the, I would say he's the most unsentimental coach or personnel evaluator ever, that I can recall. If Bill Belichick's looking at the job that Bill Belichick, the GM or coach, has not done lately, Bill Belichick would have been fired him a year early rather than a year too late. He'd have been fired both of them. Regardless of how many rings you put on Robert Kraft's finger, regardless of how many banners you hung up. Bill Belichick, we saw with Tom Brady. It didn't matter what Brady had done throughout his career. It didn't matter how much of an affection he had for Tom Brady. What was best for the team at that moment, they thought, was to move on from Tom Brady, let him walk in free agency. Okay? So I wonder, Shalise, to Charles's point about this being a shit show, how much worse could it be from letting Tom Brady go? He let his son go. He let his adopted son go in Tom Brady and has lived to tell about it, watched him win a Super Bowl somewhere else. How bad could it be letting Bill Belichick go after a 2 or 3 or maybe 4-win season?
It's true. I mean, Robert Kraft moved on from Tom Brady. And obviously, if what we've seen in the not so distant past is any indication, Robert Kraft was not a huge fan of letting go of Tom Brady. At the season opener at home, they welcomed Tom. Tom came on the field. There were dozens of former Patriots from the Brady era there. They're going to completely waive the 3 or 4 year waiting period for the Team Hall of Fame. They're going to have this massive thing on 6/12/24 next summer in the stadium. Now, normally the Patriots do the Hall of Fame induction in the plaza outside the Team Hall of Fame. For those who aren't aware, they're going to open Gillette Stadium, which of course there's profit to be made here, but they're opening Gillette Stadium to have the Tom Brady Team Hall of Fame induction ceremony next June. So could you let go of Bill Belichick? I'm sure you could let go of Bill Belichick because the other thing I don't quite understand is, like, where's Jonathan Kraft in all of this? He is supposed to have a little bit more influence over this team. He has to see that it's just, you're going to have to take a big step back in order to take steps forward. And it seems like Robert is a big fan of Gerard Mayo, who is only listed as linebackers coach, but to hear a lot of people tell it, does a lot of the defensive game planning. But yet Bill's son gets to wear the headset. It's absurd. But if they let him go, does Gerard get his chance to be head coach? Was that part of the agreement when they re-signed him earlier this year, that, whether it's a year from now, 3 years from now, whatever, when Bill steps down, that Gerard becomes the new head coach? There's a lot of moving parts, but if Robert Kraft loves this team the way it seems like he loves this team, I just think it's time for a fresh start. And it's going to be painful for a couple of years. It is, because, as we said, the cupboard's going to be bare. The roster's not great. The coaching staff and the front office might be depleted, but we're getting into the territory now of when I was a kid, that they were just an afterthought.
Don't you both think, though, part of what aided it not becoming a shit show with Tom Brady was Robert Kraft wanting to keep Brady and Tom going, no, I want to go. It's time for me to move on. What if Bill doesn't say, I want to go? It's time for me to move on. Like, to me, that's sort of the potential seam here that can be pulled apart. If Bill doesn't say, I want to go, then if Tom had said, I don't want to go, I want to continue playing for Bill Belichick. He didn't. If he had said that, though, I want to stay here, I want to play for Bill, and Bill for some reason wanted him to go, then it becomes a big issue. It's if Robert Kraft wants Bill to go and Bill doesn't want to go, that's, I think, where you're introduced. Like, but
I think the difference is, so again, this fan base has been conditioned by Bill Belichick to not attach sentiment, whether it's Lawyer Malloy, whether it's Richard Seymour, whether it's Drew Bledsoe, the list goes on and on. So this fan base has been trained to say, what have you done for me lately? That's number one. Number two, the difference is Brady, and you're right, there seemed to be more of an amicable or mutual, departure there. Brady was coming off still making the playoffs. They thought he was in decline, but he still made the playoffs. He never lost. Belichick is not going to have a recent body of work absent Tom Brady to stand on when it comes to public sentiment. Like, well, he don't want to go. Well, too bad. Just went 4-13. You got, right. You do your job. You're not doing a good job. And last but not least, Belichick not wanting to go, Charles, because if it comes out that Kraft is trying to make changes for the good of the team, and Belichick is resistant to those changes, I think it flies differently in the court of public opinion, because even Brady's departure, regardless of what the particulars were, which you would know about Brady wanting to go as much as they wanted him to leave, it still was viewed as bad move by the Patriots, letting go of a guy who turns around and wins a Super Bowl. Whereas, Shalise, I don't think it would, right? You tell me, you live there, you're close to it. How upset would Patriot Nation be at this moment if Belichick, maybe not in season, because he probably does deserve, we should put that out there, probably does deserve to at least finish the season. But if this season continues along this path, if he's fired after the season, how bad do you think the majority of Patriots fans actually feel?
I don't think many people would be upset if it came to that. Like I said, I think a lot of fans, particularly older fans, people who, lived through the days of Steve Grogan,
Sullivan Stadium,
Rod Rust, and Sullivan Stadium, and Victor Kayam, that disastrous ownership tenure. They have an appreciation, and they understand that what Bill Belichick brought them is unprecedented, that the run of success that they had was just unprecedented with Bill and Tom. So I think a lot of people would, say, thank you so much for everything you've done, but we think it's time to move on. And I don't think that they're wrong for saying that. And, the other thing, Michael, that I think about occasionally, Bill always used to say he could never see himself being like Marv Levy and coaching past like 70 years old. He's going to be 72 in April.
Yeah.
So it's weird to me, and I guess now that the Don Shula thing is in sight, Don Shula is not a fan of Bill Belichick. Bill has so much.
No, he was not.
No, he was not. And the one thing that Bill loves more than anything is the history of this game. So if Bill could supplant Don Shula, I am sure he's going to want to do that. The thing that, and Charles, you can probably speak to this way better than I can. I wonder if there are any teams who would trade for him, warts and all at this point. And we've seen
full circle.
His record without Tom Brady isn't great, but I'm sure somebody like, Jimmy Haslam or, whomever might jump at the chance to trade for him, because maybe 3 or 4 years with Bill gets them on a track and gets them to heights that they've, a certain franchise has never experienced before.
I think, what leads me to believe they would is because owners still call him for advice on hires. And you're going to tell me that if there are owners who are willing to go to him and go, who should I be hiring? What do you think of these guys? There's likely going to be an owner that's going to go, yeah, you know what? Things went bad there. He needed.
Some other fan base will definitely throw him a parade on arrival.
Sure,
Right.
Sure. Oh yeah, and I mean, there's enough beaten down fan bases out there that you could do worse than let's see if Bill Belichick's got any juice left and sell the storyline of it's a fresh change and it's recharged his batteries. And now he's got a chip on his shoulder and he's going to show everybody that he, isn't used up. Shalise, though, the one thing I wonder when you talk about sort of him being there and what the plan was past 70, I mean, you bring it up, the nepotism, I wonder, and I think Shalise, you and I have talked about this, how much of the plan was to make sure his kids were set up in the franchise? It was always he wants them to have a quarterback. He wants them to be on a winning track. He wants to have a succession plan for a head coach and the knowledge that his sons are going to still have prominent positions in the organization. I don't know if that's changed, but Shalise, do you wonder if maybe like if Bill goes, well, his kids aren't going to have jobs. Like I don't feel like they're going to.
I mean, but if Bill were to go to another team, I'm sure as a condition, he would want Brian and Steven to come with him.
Sure.
That whole. I have many thoughts about having his sons on staff after listening to him for so many years talk about earning it and all that kind of stuff.
Shalise, do you think, I wonder about this too. Shula, we all know, like Shula was not a fan. We all know that Shula had his issues with him, major. Do you think that Bill, part of wanting to erase Shula's name at the top there, might have something to do with somebody who he knows was not complimentary of him, was not flattered?
I would put money on that. He had, you could always tell, during the big glory years when they were just steamrolling people. Like I think it was 2007 that I think Washington came into Gillette and the Patriots beat them 52-3. And they just kept, Brady didn't come out of the game. They did nothing to take their foot off the gas. And it was like, you knew that there was something personal there. But you could tell other times where he wouldn't, if they were up by however many points, 3 touchdowns, he was content. He'd pull Brady and they'd be good.
I would argue the biggest thing that will always stick in him forever, the sliver he'll never be able to remove, is the Spygate shit, right? And I think it pisses him off, and it will always piss him off, that Don Shula was a prominent voice about how he felt about all that stuff happening and what it meant about the Patriots' success. And, we know there's supposed to be this code or whatever, and old guys all like a code. There's no code there. And I'm sure that the Spygate thing, I think he will always keep receipts from that forever.
Well, and not just that, some people will always keep it in their back of their minds when it comes to his legacy. So I'm gonna end this conversation with something that's probably a whole other conversation. So I hesitate to do it, but y'all got me thinking here. So even if he doesn't pass Shula, many would consider him still the greatest coach of all time. I mean, he's had that title even before he even got close to 347, right? So I don't think he needs to pass Shula to have that title. Yes, it'd be nice, but it's almost like LeBron passing Kareem in career points. Like LeBron was already in the conversation for greatest of all time. Having said that, though, this 1-5 start has reopened and remixed the conversation about was it Brady or was it Belichick? And Shalise, you talked about it earlier about how maybe we underestimated just how great the greatest actually was. So what I'm wondering, guys, Shalise, I'll start with you here. And I'm not trying to be the prisoner of the moment. I'm not trying to take anything away from what he's done. And but is there at least more of a conversation when you think about, because you mentioned Washington, I thought of Joe Gibbs. You think of Joe Gibbs, you think of Tom Landry, you think of Paul Brown, you think of guys who literally innovated and revolutionized the way the game is played. It's like, is there more of a conversation now? They needed Belichick and Brady, they needed each other. I'm not going to say either or. It was that partnership they needed each other to thrive. But is there more of a conversation, Shalise, around the greatest coach of all time? Or is he just like every other coach, just going through a rough stretch toward the end? Everything ends badly, otherwise it wouldn't end. Or do you look at Bill a little funnier in this particular light of 1-5?
So initially as you were talking, I was thinking maybe we have to reopen the conversation. But then if we consider that all of the players that Bill has coached over this time period were players that he brought in himself, and that they were able to have so much success with players who were mediocre. Yeah. We saw a lot of guys. Yeah, in the salary cap era, we saw a lot of the guys that he drafted and had success with them go elsewhere and not really be as good. Richard Seymour is one of the few who, went elsewhere and still was fantastic. Asante Samuel comes to mind, but there really weren't too many guys who left New England and had, tremendous success. So I guess if we look at, he drafted the guys and they still, a lot of them The receivers have never been great except for those couple of years when they had Randy and Wes. Maybe he still is, because he drafted these guys who weren't great and they still won 6 Super Bowls.
They weren't. You can never take that away, Charles. Like, I'm not saying he's not. Don't get me wrong. Just wonder if it's like more of a conversation than it has been really for the last decade or so, when it was like ironclad greatest of all time.
I mean, I think, it's fine if it's a conversation, but I think Shalise presents the most compelling point. Like, he built the system, he brought in the players. The fact that we've talked about it would have to be like a studs down, like go to the studs to rebuild this, speaks to what he really did in that organization. And I would point out too, it's not like, granted, they'd been in they'd been in a couple Super Bowls. There was the Parcells era. There was obviously the Bears Super Bowl. But it's not like it's a historically well-run organization. It's not like it's like Shalise brings up Victor Kiam, and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about that. I'm like, that's right. I remember that disaster. Like, it's so, he did take a franchise. He didn't just get them over the top. Like, he made them unbeatable for decades. And I know Tom obviously has a ton to do with that. And I think some people subscribe to, like, you split those Super Bowls. The first 3, like, Bill had more to do with those Super Bowl wins, and the last 3, Tom had more to do with those Super Bowl wins. So, and I'm okay with that, kind of interpretation of it. But yeah, I mean, it's someone said to me when I was working on a piece about, like, how was Kraft going to approach this? And we got into sort of philosophical conversation about Bill and Tom, and he was like, how come when people talk about Shula, they don't mention more that he did it with multiple different quarterbacks? Like, it wasn't like he had success over a sustained period of time, and it wasn't like one quarterback was there the whole time. He did it with
Joe Gibbs won a Super Bowl with 3 different quarterbacks.
Guys.
That's what I mean. Like, we got Tom Landry changed the game. Paul Brown begat Bill Belichick,
Right. Hence the conversation. But Shalise makes a really good point too, though. He, in a weird way, kind of created the slot receiver, at least the way we look at it now, of being this like prolific position. The rules committee changed the way defenders could, approach receivers and how often they could put their hands on them. Like, he did shape the game.
I don't want to suggest he wasn't an innovator. He was an innovator in his own right. Don't get me wrong. Yeah,
absolutely. He was. And and there were even some things that I think once Spygate happened, there were some things that would just never be. Like, he mentioned a decade ago about, like, putting chips in the ball.
Yeah. Yep.
And why is it so difficult to say what's a touchdown and what's not? Like, why can't we just put a chip in the ball and put, like, sensors in the pylons? And if the ball trips the sensors, then it's a touchdown. Like, he's not wrong. I think there are some things that the league, once he was considered, the bad guy, they were just never going to listen to him on certain things. But I do think there isn't one particular thing I think you can ascribe to him, but like the 3-4 defense, and then being multiple, and, in there, they started 3-4 in the early years of the dynasty, and then they switched more to a 4-3, as Charles said,
or just game planning from week to week.
Being wedded to one thing. There's something, to me, as a high school coach, it makes complete sense to me that you would play to the strengths of your players. But I've heard other coaches in the NFL talk, and some of them are just so wedded to, this is how I do it. And it just seems so basic that I figure out what the player does best and I play to his strengths, and we'll still try to develop some other stuff, but it's so basic. But not everybody understands that concept, clearly.
I remember, and this will always stick in my mind, I remember when I talked to Sean McVay after he lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots, and I was talking to him the next summer, and he said he knew he had completely screwed up as soon as they started playing in the Super Bowl. The way his game plan, he was like, I thought he was going to do this, and he did the exact opposite.
Thought he was going to play zone like he did all year.
Yeah, he's like, he did the and he said, and then like it was funny because McVay and I revisited the conversation like a couple years later, and he was like, I know how he figured it out too. He went and found this one game, like this like one game buried that we had shown this, and they had and. He just took it from this one scenario and he rolled it into the Super Bowl. And he's like, and I was like, man, that's, it's we can bag on him. And I got plenty of issues with Bill, and Bill's a guy I've gotten a chance to know him a little bit and stuff. And I know he doesn't read my stuff. He doesn't listen. He doesn't like that, but there's a lot of layers there. Some of them are really good. Some of them are not so good. And
I'm gonna tell you what, like this conversation just got me like, maybe he just deserves a chance to figure it out. Maybe I know deserves got nothing to do with it, but there is an argument. I'm sure people watching and listening to this being like, yo, he's won 6 Super Bowls. He ain't forget how to coach. Let him work through this stretch. Let him figure it out. We will see if he does move on. Didn't he get that chance? The last few years,
once Tom left, you had the year with Cam. Sure. And then you drafted Mac. He's, this isn't just this year. No, and we're all like, oh, 100%. It's time to move on. I mean, this is year 4 post Brady.
Right.
Is it 4?
And
year 4? Oh my God.
And he's not getting it done. He's not getting it done. I was gonna say, if he does move on, I just hope he has a sense of humor about it, and he gives us all old school fax that says I resign as HC of the NEP. That's what I would love to see. It's still the greatest resignation in pro football history. My main man, Charles Robinson, my sister from another, Mr. Shalise Young. I appreciate y'all so much. I love y'all. Thanks for the conversation. I'm sure we'll pick it up again as the season goes on. I don't think this story is close to being over yet.
No, I don't think so.
Love y'all.
Love you guys.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks so much for kicking it with your main man, Michael Smith. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Rate it, review it, tell your friends about it. Oh, and be sure to follow me on social media.